How's it going, people? I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. We're going to do a quick tier list for the CC format, and I am full on testing right now. I'm optimizing decks again, and I've put out some decks over on my Patreon already. For those that are subscribed to it, I would definitely check that out. I've been mostly focusing on Blitz because Blitz is one of the most requested formats on my Patreon for some reason. Like, everyone says CC is the format to go for and the format to chase, but when it actually comes to it, I get more Blitz requests than actually CC requests. But I have been working on CC quite a bit, and I got a bit of a rough idea what the meta is gonna look like. Of course, this is purely going off the data that we have from the recent Battle Hardened, as well as my personal testing against various skilled players in the world. So nothing is set in stone yet, let's make that clear. However, I do think that at this point I have a decent chunk of experience in the CC format, and I got a rough estimate and a rough guess on how certain heroes will place. But we do need to make a distinction between what is meta. Like, on the one hand, meta decks would be the decks that are most represented. Then a lot of these decks would definitely be in the S tier because they are so overrepresented that they make it in the top 8 consistently. But I like to look at the actual power level of a deck specifically and look at that in contrast to other decks out there, and that's what I'm going to be basing this tier list on today. So the thing that everyone probably wants to know, first of all, is Arachne. I have been working on an Arachne list, and I will be putting it live on my Patreon soon. I have tried various lists. I've tried aggro lists, I tried value lists, and I tried control lists. The deck is able to win a decent chunk of its games simply because the gimmick of being able to banish some combo cards that your opponent has to finish out the game themselves. So sometimes you get lucky and you end up banishing something really good that kind of stops them from winning at all. Against the Bolton, for example, if you end up banishing something like 1 or 2 Luminous Engines, then they are kind of screwed and cannot win anymore. However, the consistency of Arachne is it's not as good as where I would want it to be. Of course, this is a completely fresh hero, and we're going to be probably getting more assassin support in the future, but I think this is a bit like how Icelander used to be in Blitz, that it is kind of good, but you feel like something is missing to really push it over that edge to make it viable, and because of that, I don't think Arachne is gonna place in the S or the A tier. It's a good deck. I think the win rate that I personally have with it is around like 45 to 50%, so it's very close to being relevant, but it's just lacking that little bit of oomph to really make a dent in the current format. For example, when you're up against an Icelander deck, you can win against Iceland, and I have definitely won with Arachne because you can banish some key cards on their side and kind of keep on blocking out damage until they run out of resources. However, for every game that I win against Iceland is also a game that I lose. Same against the aggro decks. Like, once an aggro deck realizes that they can just go full aggro and kind of screw Arachne that way. For example, if I keeps on pushing out those 20-25 damage turns every turn, then Arachne cannot do much. Of course, the deck can block very consistently, but not those really ultra go wide decks. So unfortunately, I think Arachne is gonna be a B tier hero for the time being. That does mean, though, there's potential for growth. There might be somebody out there that is a much better deck builder than I am, that may be able to figure out some tricks and fine-tune the deck and pushing it up to the A tier. However, I don't think this is gonna be S tier anytime soon, but it's very close to getting there. I think it just needs a couple more tools to really push itself over the edge, and then you're probably gonna see Arachne in the S tier at some point in the future. So Azalea got some support. Azalea is definitely a much better deck than it used to be. I faced a couple of Azaleas, and the new aim counter shenanigans can pull off some very nice things. I don't think anyone has a fully optimized Azalea list yet, but I do think Azalea has a lot more potential in the current format than it used to, especially because it has a lot of disruptive abilities against the big decks out there, mainly things like the go wide decks like Briar and FFXIV, which Azalea can deal with rather consistently. It still struggles though against those full-on control decks, the Guardians, also against Icelander, unfortunately, so because of that it's definitely not an S tier hero. But the deck is definitely, it's performing a lot better than it used to be, and I think that's kind of good news, because I do know there's a lot of Azalea fans out there that really want this deck to succeed, but it's not there yet. Like, having that arrow inconsistency, you know, that you need to have an arrow on top of the deck, you need to have an arrow in hand to put it into your arsenal, all that kind of stuff, kind of makes, like, every extra step you add to a deck kind of takes away from its competitive edge, in my opinion. I'm actually a bit surprised that all the fusing decks are doing so well, because in my mind that would have been an extra step too, but people were able to make a workaround that completely. But Azalea is now definitely a B tier deck, and this is a lot better than it used to be. It used to be like really trash tier, D tier, sometimes C tier, but in the current format I think Azalea has a shot to making it to the top. I've also, when I was playing in the World Championship, I also saw a couple of Azaleas in the top in general, which is something very nice to see. Like, in my early rounds when I was still winning, I saw a couple of Azaleas around me. I think at least I saw one of them or two of them or something at tables besides me, so Azalea definitely was doing quite decently even before Dynasty. So with the new updates, this deck has a lot more potential. One of the decks that I do think has gotten a major buff in this set is definitely Dorinthia. I think Dorinthia has the potential to even push towards S tier. However, I'm not 100% sure if it can actually make it. Especially the new Pride card, it really makes Dorinthia's Downblade even more relevant than it used to be. Especially if you can play a Pride early on at the end of your turn when you draw up and it passes over to your turn. Let's for example, when you make your opponent go first, you block everything they're trying to do, and then with a floating resource you just play a Pride, put a counter on your Downblade, and now you're going into an absolutely amazing turn with a full hand, a counter already on there, making it even harder for your opponent to block and kind of forcing them to try and blocking it out that turn, or else they may lose the tempo the entirety of the game. So I think Dorinthia with the current buff, like I used to push like 9 to 12 damage a turn, but with the new cards I see myself pushing closer to 13 or 14 damage a turn once I get the ball rolling a bit, and that is very close to the amount of damage that you see from decks like Viceroy and Briar every turn. So I do think Dorinthia definitely has it in her to become an S tier deck. However, because it's so easily disrupted by things like Guardian, because that's like one go big move that if it's fully blocked then the turn kind of ends. I think it's probably gonna sit around A tier, but it's so close to reaching the S tier. If we end up with something that pushes the Guardians out of the meta, this will move up straight away, pretty much straight away. Briar, on the other hand, is an S tier deck. It struggles against Icelander, but against pretty much everything else it has a very significant matchup. I played against a very good Briar player from Belgium, and I've been jamming my Fi against it, and I would say that Briar has about a 50-50 matchup into Fi. Against things like All Team and Bravo, it's again a little bit difficult, because if they can disrupt just enough, then Briar cannot do a lot, but usually they don't have enough disruption to really throw Briar's plan off completely, especially when you get stuff like the Channel Mount Heroic Life into, even with things like Force of Nature on top of that, you are just gonna win the game on the spot. There's just no going around it. Well, the turn after that, you first need to put stuff down, put some stuff in the arsenal, and then you go off and you pretty much win the game. I do think though, and this is something that I see a lot of Fi players do wrong, and I'm a Fi main myself, and when I see them playing against Briar, when the Channel Mount Heroic comes down, I see Fi players trying to block out the Channel Mount turn, and I can tell you, you're not gonna win by blocking out the Channel Mount turn, because once they put the Channel Mount Heroic down, the one thing that Briars don't want to do is blocking stuff, because they want to keep all the resources to have like a giant turn in the following turn. So the best thing you can do as an aggro player, and especially as a Fi player, is like once the Channel Mount Heroic comes down, You don't block anything, you just take whatever they throw at you in that turn, which is usually a 7 attack followed by maybe another 7 attack, and then during your turn you need to push back as much damage as possible to get them into that 1 to 10 life range. So in the following turns you might go to low life, but you will be presenting lethal every single turn and kind of forcing them to keep blocking with their full hand and winning the game that way. That's my advice for the 5 players out there, so for those of you that made it this far into the video, keep that in mind. That's how I win my Briar matchups. Same thing in Blitz. If I'm up against a Briar and Blitz with my Ira, I let him plonk that Channel Mount down, and then I just try to push as much damage as possible during my turn to really throw off the momentum and to try and take over the game that way, because the Channel Mount Heroic isn't that threatening if they don't have any cards in hand, right? So there's a little tip from me, and to do with it as you please. So Dash, definitely S tier now. With the new updates, Dash has gotten even more consistent. I have been toying around with the Hanabi Blaster, but I don't think the Hanabi Blaster is the way to go, simply because if you run the Blaster and your opponent knows that and they are running a deck that has a significant amount of 3 to 6 blocks in the deck itself, they can very easily block you out until you completely run out of cards, and this is kind of a problem with the Blaster build in general, because once you have no cards left in the deck, you have no way of attacking, which is also why things like Ranger don't really perform that well, like Azalea. So I don't think the Hanabi Blaster is gonna be a top tier choice in general. However, you can put the Blaster in your sideboard against those decks that don't want to block. For example, if you're up against a fight deck, for example, that Blaster can really give you that little bit of aggro edge to really close out that metagame, that matchup rather quickly. Fly, of course, it's an S tier deck and no way around it. I probably need to downshift a lot of these heroes soon, because there is a tier 0 deck in the format, namely Icelander. This deck is busted. This deck is so absolutely amazing because of it's a very hard deck to master, but once you've mastered it, you can pretty much consistently win almost every single matchup that you get paired up against, which is kind of nice to see that there's such a high skill cap deck in the format right now. But on the other hand, it does mean that we're gonna see a lot of Icelanders in the metagame, and I do know that there's a lot of people that don't like facing these decks, but I would say if you're facing an Icelander, just see it as a challenge of trying to outdo their play so that you can win regardless, because it's a tough matchup for sure, but it's here to stay until it reaches Living Legend. That's just the straight up fact of it all, so we might as well accept it as the villain of the CC format right now, because it is here to stay for quite some time. It might get Living Legend in the ProQuest season if it manages to get enough wins, but I think this deck is probably not gonna hit Living Legend in the ProQuest season yet. Briar might, but Icelander definitely isn't. But it's definitely a tier 0 deck. If there were a tier higher than this, I would probably put this into the S tier plus or something like I did before. However, there are people out there that get very angry when I split the S tier up into 2 categories, so I'm not gonna do that anymore. Then next up, well, Starfall is currently Living Legend, so we put that into the D tier, as well as Chain, which is also a Living Legend deck. And Prism, sadly, like Prism would really be able to deal with Icelander quite efficiently, and I think in the game design in general, they probably had Prism in mind. They probably expected Prism to still be in the format to kind of police Icelander a bit. Unfortunately, Prism is no longer around, and I do think that maybe Legend Story Studios needs to revise the Living Legend ruling in general, because we see a lot of these heroes going away, and it's kind of sad because there are a lot of people that I know that were a Prism main or people that were a Chain main, and if you are a Starfall main, then please unsubscribe, leave. I don't want anything to do with you because this was a bullshit deck and I don't want you on my channel. But jokes aside, like, there were people that were really avid mains of these 2 decks, and they don't really have a home right now where they can play properly. Like, of course you have Dromai, and of course you have Briar and Viscerai, but those are really very different playstyle deck, so I can't wait. I believe in March we're gonna get the new versions of these two heroes, and I'm really looking forward to see what those have in store, because people need a place to play the cards in the CC format. Of course, you can play Prism and Blitz, which by the way is doing very well in the Blitz format now, which surprises me, mainly because there's so many Icelanders around. But yeah, I hope we get a new Prism soon, because we really need this hero to police the format a bit. A lot of people hate Prism, they hate facing Prism, but personally I would rather face a Prism than all the Frostbite shenanigans that Icelander keeps pushing. So that's my 2 cents. If your opinion is different on that, then that's your thing, not mine. So Lexi, A tier for sure. It's a really high mastery deck. Again, we have this arrow inconsistency. If you don't draw the right arrows and the right elements at the same time, you're kind of screwed. And with these fusing decks, you already have the element inconsistency built into it on top of the arrow inconsistency. So unfortunately, I don't see Lexi going to S tier anytime soon, but it's definitely an A tier deck. Katsu, on the other hand, I had high hopes for the Crouching Tiger build of Katsu, but I don't think the Crouching Tiger build is gonna be meta, unfortunately. There are people doing a lot of theory crafting, like, oh, you can push 100 plus damage turns. Yeah, that's true, but if your opponent knows that you're running Crouching Tigers, they're not gonna block with the equipment, they're gonna save a defense reaction in the arsenal, and then when you finally have your big combo turn and you play a 6 Crouching Tigers into your Tiger Swipe, they're just gonna block that stuff out. And of course they might have a Razor Reflex on hand, but that's why you have a defense reaction ready by just blocking with your equipment and drawing the defense reaction on top of that to stop them from getting their Tiger Swipe a hit in. And yeah, they will be able to get a second Tiger Swipe off, which you can then fully block again. And I know if they run the Master of the Pouncing Lynx, they will have a third Tiger Swipe probably, which means that they are gonna get their 6 Tigers back. But what are you looking at here then? So they will have that Tiger Swipe coming in for 4 damage. They have 6 Tigers up front, which were probably 1 or 2 damage each. Let's say 2 damage. So that was 12 damage, and then they got a second round of Tigers coming in for an additional 12 damage. That's 24 damage plus the Tiger Swipe is 28. That's just not enough to finish off your opponent. And then you can be like, yeah, but they can also run the other combos in the deck to try and get the opponent low enough. But I just don't see it happening. There's just too much setup required, and by the time that you're set up, you're probably rather low on life already, and then you're in a situation that you need your full hand to pull off your combo. And if your opponent does anything like a pummel or a discard or whatever way of disrupting your hand, like now with the new Harpoon card in Mechanologist for example, then you're just not going to be able to do your big combo, and pretty much most of your deck is built around that combo. Then you're completely dependent on your Lord of Wind hitting in order to be able to finish the opponent that way, which is again a combo that's rather easy to block. So I don't see Katsu, I don't see it going to A tier or even S tier. Unfortunately, I'm sad. It's a B tier deck to me at the moment. Of course, I'm still very early in my testing phase, and maybe I will figure out a balance to make it even more consistent, because I thought maybe a Turtle Katsu would be able to really do well with the Crouching Tigers, but the problem is that you cannot save your Crouching Tigers in the Banish Zone. Originally, I thought you could do that when I first got my spoiler cards, but you have to play them the turn you put them into the Banish Zone. You can pull off some shenanigans with the Mindset of Tiger, that you get a Tiger into your hand at the beginning of your turn, but when you have your Mindset of Tiger down, your opponent probably knows that you're planning to combo off in the following turn, so they're gonna try and put as much pressure and disruption onto you as they can. So for you Katsu fans out there, it's a good deck. It's definitely playable. Like I would say, it definitely has like a 45 to 50% win chance from my experience, but it doesn't have that 55% up chance like some of the S tier decks do to really push it into the high competitive range of the Flesh and Blood meta, so it's gonna be a B tier deck for the time being, but there's hope for it. I think the Crouching Tiger combo stuff is definitely a good step it's a step in the right direction, and I'm really looking forward to see what else Katsu has in store for us in the future, but I think it's a meme at the moment, unfortunately. Even with triple Art of War, even with triple Roar of the Tigers, it's just a meme, and we just need to accept that, which is fine. It's fine to have some meme decks that can still win tournaments once in a while. It's just not S tier. So Dromai is definitely A tier. I think we have too many aggro decks in the S tier range at the moment to really make Dromai a competitively viable pick. But I guess once Briar reaches Living Legend, and maybe Dromai will have a better matchup in the current metagame, because we do know that Dromai can deal rather efficiently with Icelander. It's not a, well, maybe it doesn't, because the current Icelander build has so many 6+ attacks to pop the Phantasms on dragons, right? So I'm not sure. Like, we need to see what happens once Briar reaches Living Legend, but I do think once Briar is gone, maybe this one will move up to S tier, but for now it's in a bit of a tough spot with too many aggro decks that just keep on destroying all the dragons. And at the same time we have disruption from things like Icelander, which Dromai can deal with rather efficiently, I suppose, but the mid-range Icelander list with the 6 drops, it just slaughters this deck, I believe, and I don't know what to say. Like, if you need to pay Frostbite for every dragon you try to attack in with, you're just setting yourself up for failure, because Icelander can just push back more damage every single turn, I would say. Maybe I haven't tested the Dromai versus Icelander matchup enough, or maybe I'm not giving Dromai enough credit, or maybe I've just been watching bad players navigating the deck. If you are a Dromai main, let me know, what is your matchup against Icelander, because I'm a bit at a loss where to put this hero. I will probably put it into A tier because of the aggro heroes, but does this have a good enough matchup against things like Icelander to maybe move it up a slot? Let me know down below, and I'll probably revise that in a future video. So Kano right now, I don't think Kano is doing much in the metagame at the moment. It definitely lends itself to having a good pilot to be able to perform well, but I believe that most Wizard players are probably navigating Icelander right now because it has a much higher potential in the current metagame. So I do think that Kano right now is a P tier deck. And next up we have Levia. Levia is not really doing much in the metagame. It's a very one-trick sided. It's a one-trick pony that tries to just deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but just dealing damage alone is just not good enough in the current metagame, I believe, especially when there's so much disruption in it at the moment. So I think it's a D tier deck. I'll probably put it C tier because it does have a very high damage output, but I think this is probably as high as it's gonna get in the near future. I'm gonna put Rhino in the A tier simply because it has a very good matchup against Iceland, and it can also deal with the Guardians rather efficiently because it can go around all control strategy. On top of that, it has some relevant on hits with pummels and stuff like that it can definitely deal with Fi, so maybe it's even S tier at the moment, but it's kind of like a sleeper deck. However, the deck has a bit of an inconsistency built into it, which kind of makes it, like, it kind of loses to itself. Like, if you roll your Skepticons and you roll a 0 and then you roll it again and you roll another 0, then you pretty much lose the game on the spot test. So it definitely has an RNG factor built into it, which probably pushes it one step down the competitive ladder, so I will put it in the A tier for the time being. But the deck has a lot of potential. It is a natural counter against everything that is good right now. It can beat Mechanologists, it can beat things like Icelander by filtering stuff out of their hand or forcing them to commit to stuff that they don't want to early on. So I think it's an A tier deck, maybe even S tier like I said, but let's put it over here. Viserai, it's still the high roll deck of the format. It's definitely able to perform well if it can get some good draws and then just steamrolling the opponent. However, I don't think it's S tier like Briar. It's a little bit more inconsistent and it has a little bit worse blocking potential than the Briar deck does, therefore I will put it in the A tier. All team definitely an S tier deck. Bravo is probably an A tier deck, but even though I haven't really seen it perform much, I guess most Guardian players are just running all team instead. But Bravo, it has a really good matchup against Briar, against Fi. It has a good matchup against Mechanologist as well, simply because it can keep on disrupting what they want to do with their go wide, go against strategies, as well as forcing them to discard. I guess against Icelander it also has a decent matchup because it can just put a very big attack up front and then forcing Icelander to commit on the spot. But I do advise, if you are a Bravo player and you do go face to face with an Icelander, don't create Seismic Surge tokens. And I'm saying this because if your Seismic Surge pops, that gives a opportunity window at instant speed for an Icelander to react to that, and then they can flood your board with bullshit like Frostbite tokens and stuff like that, making it maybe even impossible for you to do your big attack. I also advise not to activate Bravo, because if you do, you run the risk of them just responding to the trigger of that. So just put your big attack up front, force them to block, and just keep on putting pressure that way, and then you should probably be fine. So Bolton is really a deck that I have high hopes for. In my opinion, Bolton is definitely an A tier deck, simply because it has such high combo potential. It loses out to Icelander. Icelander can disrupt it rather efficiently, and I guess the Guardians can also kind of go toe to toe with it quite well. However, against the aggro decks, like once Bolton has his combo set up, which is usually around turn 3 or 4, like he can just block out, put a couple of things in his soul, and then just going all in. And the new legendary that just got released made Bolton even better. If you draw into that, you don't even need things in your soul to go off with your Lumina combo, because your Luminas will give you additional action points, so you don't need to trigger Bolton to give go again to your Sabers, which means that now all of a sudden you don't run the risk of them over blocking your Sabers and then not being able to put stuff into your soul to keep on attacking inward. So Bolton is definitely A tier right now, and I think as we're looking at the tier list right here, this is probably what the current metagame is roughly gonna look like. Let's see, so in terms of power level, I think Ultim is probably right before Briar. These two, I think this is about correct. I think Briar is the slightly better deck than Mechanologist, and I guess Fi is slightly better than Mechanologist in the current metagame. So I think from highest to lowest we have Icelander, Ultim, Briar, Fi, and Mechanologist. If you're going for a control deck, go for Ultim. If you want a mid-range deck, then definitely Icelander is the deck for you. And for the aggro decks, they're all very close to each other. Just go with the one that flavor-wise is the most suitable to you. If you want an anti-meta deck, I think Dorinthia is definitely the deck for you as well as Reiner. Like, these two are very good anti-meta decks. However, they become less good if you see more of these in the format. So if there's not that many Dorinthias and not that many Rhiners, then these are very good, which is something that's going on right now. But if there's too many of these, then they become less useful, and you're probably better off going for some of these other heroes up here. Not Fi though. Fi definitely loses in a Reiner and Dorinthia meta, I would say. But let's see what else we have. I think Bravo is probably in the right position here. I think Bolton is probably even a little bit stronger than Bravo at the moment, simply because of that big combo potential. I think Viserai should be around here somewhere between Reiner and Lexi, and between these two I think Dromai is probably a slightly stronger deck than these two even, so let's go ahead and put Dromai at the front. I think this is about correct, so Dromai at the front, and Dorinthia, Reiner, Viserai, Lexi, Bolton, and Bravo. Arachne, very close to A tier. I am definitely happy putting him there. I think Katsu is also very close to A tier at the moment. It's just lacking a little bit, so we'll put him right over here. Keanu and Azalea, I think at the moment he's about the same power level, I would guess, but I need to look into data once that one starts coming in during the ProQuest season, which is still more than a month away, so we're gonna have to wait for some proper data for quite some time now. And then Levia in the C tier. I think Levia is probably the only hero that I would consider not playable at the moment. It's sad to say. Flavor-wise, Levia is really such a cool deck, but I I just don't think it's good enough in the current format. So if you're really a big Levia fan, maybe you can make yourself a custom art of Reiner with the Levia artwork or something like that, but you just play it as a Reiner because it's not going anywhere. And I talked to Mansand at the World Championship, and I think he asked the developers like when Levia will get new support, and I'm sharing this with you because this is what Mansand told me. So it's just like speculation and rumor territory at this point, but he told me that Levia will get support in about 10 months from now, so it's still gonna be quite a while before we will see this hero performing well. We've also seen James White mentioning that I think next year he mentioned that Azalea is gonna be, in his word, the business, so Azalea is gonna see some new support in the future. So if that means we're gonna get a new Azalea hero that is better than the current one, or if we're gonna see so much new Azalea support that the current one is gonna be completely busted, I don't know which of the two is gonna be, but Azalea is definitely gonna be a good deck in the near future. And I think overall in the CC format, I'm happy with the CC format. We're in a very good spot right now. I would like to see the control decks and the aggro decks being less aggro and less control, so we can go more to a authentic Flesh and Blood experience from the WTR to Crucible of War days, but I'm starting to come to terms that those days are over, and that the ridiculous amount of aggro that we have nowadays versus the ridiculous amount of control is probably what Flesh and Blood is going to be looking like in the foreseeable future. So we just need to be positive, accept things for what they are, and from what I can tell, most decks are viable now, most decks have a place in the meta game, and I think there's room for everyone to play their favorite hero, except for those that have a favorite living legend hero. Unfortunately, those need to wait until March. So yeah, that's all from me for today. Let me know what you think. I do think this tier list is kind of accurate, but if you feel like I am over or under judging certain heroes, let me know down in the comments, but please do it in a constructive manner, in a friendly manner. This is a positive space. I want to see positive comments in the comment section, and I will see you all very soon at another event, I suppose, and I will definitely see you soon with another Flesh and Blood video. Take care.